Hello, my name is Susanna Moore. I'm Program Associate at the Initiative for MPTs, or IMPT, a project of CAMI Health housed at the Public Health Institute. I'm joined today by Bethany Young-Holt, Director of the IMPT, and Hannah Rubens, our Research Assistant. We are delighted to be hosting today's Let's Talk MPTs webinar discussion with a virtual panel of MPT product developers and regulatory experts. Today's discussion aims to provide other MPT product developers and stakeholders with examples of regulatory pathways and global regulatory considerations for MPTs. We have almost 100 people registered from across time zones planning to join us today. So as we wait for others to log in, we invite you to type your name, affiliation, and where you're located into the chat feature. And if you're a product developer, we invite you to also mention the type of product and its stage of development, if you'd like. We want to note that everyone will be muted during the presentations, and during the Q&A sessions, you can unmute yourselves to speak. If you have questions for our speakers during their talks, we invite you to use the chat function, and we'll be glad to address those during the Q&A. And for technical issues, you can chat Hannah Rubens, the IMPT, who will be acting as our tech host today as well. And so everybody is aware, the webinar recording and related resources from today's discussion will be available later this week on the impt.org. So to kick us off here, I'm sure that many of you know regulatory pathways are a critical and complex topic, and they're all the more complex when we're thinking about MPTs, since these products have multiple indications and many of them involve combining 2 or more active ingredients. Today's discussion on MPT regulatory pathways will feature presentations by Mary Witzel at Yazo Therapeutics, who will focus on MPTs with a single active ingredient that has multiple indications. We'll also hear from Daniel Loven at Population Council, who will focus on MPTs in their pipeline, including those that combine multiple active ingredients to address 2 or more indications, and those that are drug and device combination. And last, we'll hear from Wilberto Robles of WCG Cares, who will present on global regulatory and registration considerations and tips for success. While in 90 minutes, only so much can be addressed, we aim to highlight key issues and also connect leaders working across disciplines to further stimulate innovation and collaboration in this area. We also want to point out the list of suggested readings related to today's webinar topic. These were included in the most recent webinar announcement we sent by email last week to our network, and they'll also be available on the IMPT website along with today's recording. For those joining who may be new to the MPT field, multipurpose prevention technologies, or MPTs, are products designed to simultaneously address HIV, other sexually transmitted infections, and/or unintended pregnancy. Condoms, both internal and external, are currently the only approved methods that provide simultaneous protection against these interlinked sexual and reproductive health risks. But new types of MPTs in development could be one-stop shop products that revolutionize sexual and reproductive health by incorporating prevention of HIV and other STIs into contraceptives, which are often less stigmatized. Currently, there's an array of about 24 MPTs in the development pipeline with active funding. Many of these are in early stages of development, while some are in clinical stages. If you're interested in learning more about the product development pipeline, you can check out our MPT database at mpts101.org. So before we kick off with the speakers, just a review of what is the Let's Talk MPTs discussion series. For those of you who haven't joined earlier, we launched this series in 2020 to engage experts virtually from diverse disciplines across the globe and help address MPT and HIV prevention, R&D priorities, and gaps. Topics for our discussions have been informed by many of you, our MPT partners, including through 2 stakeholder surveys we conducted to learn about topics you'd be interested in. Some past topics have included the role of cervicovaginal microbiota and contraception, HIV prevention, and MPTs, and the integration of social behavioral and market research into MPT R&D, among others. All past webinar recordings are available on our website, where we also announce upcoming topics in the series. So as with our past discussions, today we're looking forward to an engaged and lively discussion with all of you. And now I'm delighted to welcome our featured discussants. We'll be starting with Mary Weitzel. She's co-founder and president CEO of Yasso Therapeutics. Mary brings over 20 years of experience in the field of women's reproductive health, as well as 35 years of successful senior management experience and business expertise, including contract manufacturing and personal care products. She'll be followed by Daniel Loven again, who is Director of Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance for the Population Council, where he provides regulatory strategy and other advice to ensure an efficient development pathway and that the Population Council complies with regulatory requirements. Wilberto Robles, our third panelist, is Senior Director of Global Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance at WCG Cares. He brings over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical, medical device, and cosmetic industries, and has made extensive contributions to enabling access to sexual and reproductive health products around the world. With that, I will hand it over to Mary so we can hear directly from her. Thank you, Mary.
Where'd you go? Here we are. There, now I'm all queued up. So yes, I'm co-founder, president, CEO, and have served as PI for all our grants, and we're trying to develop reproductive health drug products, and that will help us establish a core profitable business, but our ambition is to have low cost of goods so that we can participate in lesser developed economies, et cetera. So here was our goal. We have an interesting drug that has very broad activity. It's both contraceptive and it is anti-infective. Oh gosh, I forgot something important, and I hope he's here on the call, but I want to let you all know that Dr. Don Waller helped me get our message really crisp. So Don definitely helped me develop these slides that you're seeing today. So back to our goal, we want a single vaginal gel that is both contraceptive and prevents certain sexually transmitted infections. And here were some of the considerations. And you would think these would be easy and short discussions, but they weren't as we went around and around. But the FDA is just not structured to consider simultaneous indications using a single new chemical entity. So ultimately what we did was we developed preclinical studies that we thought would be appropriate, and we used current, and by current, I mean people who are actively consultants, key people at our CROs who are right in the mix, current with their experience to develop our preclinical studies. And we met with each division of the FDA that had our authority over the claim. So we met with the division of antiviral products, and we met with what was called the Division of Bone, Reproductive, and Urinary Tract Products. It's now called the Division of Urinary Obstetrics and Gynecology. And those events, those Type B meetings happened about a year apart, but the feedback was pretty consistent between both. Small differences. So for instance, the drug works by calcium channel dysregulation as a spermicide. It has absolutely nothing to do with how it protects from disease. And so not surprisingly, the contraceptive branch, I'll call them, asked us to conduct a HERG assay to see any kind of effect on the heart. And that was the kind of thing that we built in. So we harmonized the feedback, not surprisingly, since it's a single route of administration, safety as it applies to men and women, humans, as seen in preclinical studies, were very much the same. So that really worked out well. And of course, there's advantages to doing that. And for us, the toxicology will apply to all indications. Preclinical toxicology will apply to all indications. that are addressed using vaginal administration during sexual intercourse. And our hope was that the phase 1 clinical trial could also be designed in such a way that it could then support multiple phase 2 clinical trials. And what was also nice, and there's great alignment actually, especially when it comes to phase 2 clinical trials, but you have clear endpoints. You can identify the right population. It's going to be faster. The clinicians want a simple, clean protocol. This will help with recruitment and retainment of clinical trial participants. And you'll have clarity of what data you do gather at the end. So people were, I think everybody was in alignment. This was fine. And we would select the indications based on, since we're trying to establish a for-profit entity, what's urgent, what's fundable, what do people care about, and then minimal time to a phase 3 clinical trial. One of the other nice things is doing this kind of work and help you maintain patent life, which is critical if you are going to be seeking private funding, is maintaining a patent portfolio on your work. So because we had a single new chemical entity, it's great story, efficient use of capital. Our cost of goods will be much lower overall because you'll have high volumes. And then the PK is applicable to all indications for that single route of administration. So here is a single gel with multiple indications. We as a team, Barbara North, Don Waller, Mike Oldham, and myself, all feel a great commitment to developing a new contraceptive, in part because we know it's desperately needed, non-hormonal contraceptive, but also it tends to be in the developed economies that women are sensitive to pregnancy more so than they are necessarily to sexually transmitted disease. So this becomes a driver for adoption, trial adoption, repeated use. So we hope to keep focused on contraception as our primary indication, but at the end of our phase 1, we should have all the adequate safety data that we could, and we would have, preliminary efficacy data at the end of our phase 1 for contraception. This allows us then to say, well, if we see at the end of the day that it's questionable that contraception can continue forward, we still have other indications that would benefit. There's herpes treatment and prevention. There's gonorrhea prevention. We have excellent data for that. And I brought into this HIV. The drug we use today was actually invented at a time when HIV was almost untreatable, and especially in lesser developed economies. So we, as being sort of a second generation drug, have put it aside, trying to get into any kind of clinical trial like that. But our hope is at the end of a phase 1 clinical trial, maybe there'll be a partner out there who wants to take this, work on other dosage forms like a film, and let's see what we can do with it. So again, advantages are we maintain and we can generate new IP. Time to market can be improved by breaking it down into different indications. There may be partnerships out there where somebody's really interested just in herpes. We can get them to take it off and run those kind of trials. And we could even out-license those applications. Just now segueing on to regulatory terms that if you're not familiar with them, and I apologize if this seems very remedial, but I run into this. Our new chemical entity, any new pharmaceutical is a drug substance. Any old pharmaceutical is drug substance. That is how the FDA talks about it. That's what you will find in your IND and other regulatory filings, is the active ingredient is drug substance. The gel itself is called a drug product. And here I will recommend to you that really carefully select your excipients to make sure that at the concentration that FDA has accepted in the past for that route of administration or less. I also really recommend, really check out whoever you're going to work with, who's going to take that formulation that you have, and they're going to actually start producing product at scale for clinical trials. You want people with substantial current experience with your dosage form. It's critical, or you can end up losing time. That's one of my scars that we talked about earlier. So there's less money and time required if you can use a single gel for multiple indications. And then finally, if a vaginal gel in which you use an applicator is a combination product, whether it's one drug or multiple drugs, it's because the applicator is considered a medical device here at the FDA, at least. It's a class 1, and they have a process for handling combination products like that, where the FDA decides which division will sort of rule on your product. It's easy to see, it will be the gel in our case. But just so you know, you can't, if you want to get a whole new applicator that hasn't been approved by FDA in the past, that'll be part of your path going forward. The other thing to point out is ours is an aqueous gel. And for those of you who may be working on an aqueous gel, stability, of course, is important, but you don't overlook things like moisture loss. It's really a problem. And those little polyfilm packets are not necessarily moisture proof. So it's really something to keep in your thought process as you look at packaging. Obviously, any leakage from the applicator is a problem. We're concerned that although we're working with a great applicator, its impact on the waste stream isn't tenable for the long term. And once we have an approved product in the market, that'll be one of our priorities, is to find something that's either biodegradable or reusable. So here are some more tips I'd like to offer. That is, and this would be tips if I could go in the Wayback Machine, I'd give to myself earlier as well. So FDA has become very interested in quality by design, and I only learned that they had gotten into this in the past few years. And I'm heartened by it, and so should you be, because many other industries have been using quality by design under different names, but auto industry, I worked in the polymer industry. We used it and had great success in very consistent performing products. So get familiar with it now as you're doing your work, because you may be inspired for some studies that may really head off problems for you farther down the line. Early type B meeting, really, you should do it early. Do not wait till the last minute. Do not wait until you think you've got everything and find yourself behind the 8 ball. We really, really, it was a great thing that we went to FDA once we had a preclinical plan prior to doing any studies. Also, although the team, Barbara, Mike, and Dawn especially have a lot of experience in developing drugs and devices, not necessarily as current as, say, some of the consultants or the CROs that we went to. And in fact, every person we talk to has got stories that help you be better and smarter about how you design your studies. So keep your ears open, talk to people, tell them where you're at with your development, and get advice about what studies or how they might be designed best for you. Another thing specifically for a gel, which I wish we had done and we haven't done yet, is to incorporate things like a design of experiments to really try and fine tune that gel, because often vaginal products are sort of on the target, but they're not necessarily on the bullseye between efficacy and safety. And there's got to be a way to do this. So that's where I'm at. I'm looking at this. We're looking at this. I offer it up to you if you're at a good stage to try and bring in those kinds of very rigorous experiments. And then most importantly, define early and rigorously follow vendor selection policies and procedures. Just because somebody did a great job 10 years ago doesn't mean that they are current at their job. Key people may have left. So really, really dig into this before you commit to working with even somebody you know and like and knew from 10 years ago. Get to know them again. So here I want to quickly acknowledge this is actually a number of people that have helped us over, oh golly, a good 7 years now. But all of them helped influence our regulatory plans and most critically, the studies and how they were designed in order to meet the regulatory requirements. At the top of the list are Sharon Achilles and Beatrice Chen and Amy Adler, who all helped with our clinical trial design. We've had a number of toxicology folks that have been excellent that have helped us, including Francis Mielik, Bill Rencher, Tony Chancellor, Dimitri Mondus. All those folks are good chemistry people. Even today, we have a guy, Mark Goodsell, who's VP of quality at a company about to go with their IPO, and he's been just a tremendous help to us to keep us current. Even Jim Turpin lobbed in the last suggestion for us, which we haven't acted on yet. And then on the right-hand side are the CROs that have been critical and really have helped us. And then also the feedback from the FDA has been tremendous help. And then lastly, this is not to talk about, you just know it'll be on the IMPT website. This is just a selection of some of the guidance for industry documents that we have used and read, and I personally have found very helpful. And at the last bullet shows you where you can look for the inactive ingredient search that FDA considers acceptable. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. You packed in a lot of information in that.
I tried.
Brief presentation. I think very practical information. Thank you so much. We do have a couple minutes for some questions from those on the line. If anyone has questions specifically for Mary, I do see one that came into the chat already from Travis Kent, NICHD. Travis asks if Mary can explain quality by design in a little more detail.
Quality by design in a simple way is just, for instance, you develop a target product profile, and then you and decide that that's your quality, and then you design your work to support that, the development of the product, the supporting data underneath that. So at a very simplistic level, and it'll be very much product specific about what is meant by that. But trying to set perhaps tolerances, there's one that would be important. In the case of our product, we want something that's pleasant to use. You could build in what would be an acceptable dropout rate due to irritation. These are all the kinds of things that you could do with quality by design, so that you address this ahead of time and build it in and not get surprise data at the end that may drive you to have to change your product and or redo a study, etc. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Mary. We may be able to add a link to something about that as well. There's not here already. Does anyone else on the line have questions? You can enter them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask. We do have time for an extended discussion at the end as well. If things crop up later, you can always ask.
I see one question just asking if we had challenges getting meetings with FDA. I'm not quite sure what WRO is, but oops, there we go. Somebody's finding answers to quality by design. Oh, written responses only. Oh, there you go. So actually written responses were terrific. We didn't get a meeting. If you want to get it done quickly, accept written answers, but we found them to be, am I muted? No, I'm good. We did get written answers only. They were very helpful for us, and we had no problem with that. There was nothing to debate or necessarily try to persuade or argue with. So at this time, at least, that was adequate for us. And we got it accepted really in record time. In just a few weeks, they accepted our request and set up a meeting. So we were happy. I think we had answers in between 2 and 3 months from the time we first made the request. Oh, and now, did the different review divisions coordinate the reviews? No, not to our knowledge. No, we went to, actually, at the time we were funded by NIAID, and so we deliberately went to the Division of Antiviral Products first. And we had to chew on that, and it was still early enough, that was fine. And it was only a year later that we went to the branch that would, or the division that dealt with contraceptive products. And we had tailored, again, we had slightly redesigned our studies and got back some more tweaks, and we were happy with that. I do know they attended, you'll see, like I went to a large meeting for HIV prevention, MPTs, and there were representatives from the division dealing with contraceptives. So that was heartening to see that they're definitely in tune. So that was helpful too.
Great. Thank you for those great questions so far. I think with that, if there's any more, we can take them during the group discussion time. Thanks again, Mary. And now we will pass it over to Dan.
Thanks, Susanna. I'm Dan Lum with the POP Council. I'll talk about 3 products. If you can go to the next slide. 3 products that are MPT products that POP Council has under development or we're collaborating on the development of. Discuss the regulatory pathways a little bit and some of the challenges that we've seen. First, a little description. The first one I want to talk about is a dual prevention pill, DPP. That combines the oral contraceptive levonorgestrel and ethinyl estradiol with the pre-exposure prophylaxis ingredients in Descovy, which are emtricitabine and tenofovir alafenamide. The second is the EEQ ring. It's the etonogestrel ethinyl estradiol Q-Griffithson pod type ring, which is a vaginal ring. It's going to offer contraception and HIV prevention and protection against several STIs. The third is the FDI, the fast dissolve insert. It's for vaginal use. It's an on-demand product, it's paracoidal use, which will offer protection against HIV and HPV. If we can go to the next slide, please, Susanna. This slide is from the Population Council's own Martha Brady, her presentation in 2012 about MPTs, and it shows 3 different ways to classify MPT products. On the top row, you can see they can be sorted by the indications that they address. The second row sorts them by their drug and device classification. And the third row sorts them by their approval status, each of the actives, whether they're approved or unapproved. And I've added in labels into this slide to show the status of each of the 3 products that I'm discussing and where they fit into each classification. And it's very important where a product fits into each of these classifications because it's going to affect the regulatory approval pathway. So on the bottom row, you can see the DPP is an example where we're taking 2 approved therapies and combining them into one. Levonorgestrel and ethinyl estradiol are approved as a combined oral contraceptive in many different products. And the emtricitabine and tenofovir alafenamide are approved as the PrEP ingredients. Because both the contraceptive therapy and the PrEP therapy are both already approved, this makes the DPP one of the easiest regulatory pathways possible. The actual mechanism will be a 505(b)(2) application, which means that we will rely upon the FDA findings of safety and efficacy of the innovator drugs, and in this case, both of them. And we'll do a bioequivalence study. So no phase 3 study is expected to be necessary. Again, on the bottom row, we look at the EEQ. This has etonogestrel and ethinyl estradiol and an unapproved drug, Q-Griffithson. And in this example, a 505(b)(2) is also the pathway we're planning to use. However, since the Q-Griffithson is not an approved product, we expect to need to do 2 adequate and well-controlled studies in phase 3. And this product also has an added complication of having a device constituent part. Finally, the FDI, the fast dissolve insert. This is a vaginal insert with carrageenan and griffinsin, and it's an example of two experimental therapies being combined into one. So this will require the Population Council to produce sufficient preclinical data on the active ingredients and on the combination, and then also prove safety and efficacy in phase 3. Since Population Council will own the underlying data, the 505(b)(1) pathway in this case is appropriate and necessary. So this will be a standalone NDA, and there's no device component for the FDI unless we co-package with an applicator, as Mary mentioned before. If we go to the next slide, moving on to the challenges, I grouped them into 5 categories. First is the combination rule. The second is clinical efficacy for each indication. Combining the label is an issue, device regulations, and CMC issues. If we go to the next slide, please, Susanna. Since 1975, this has been FDA's policy regarding combinations of actives in a single product. It very simply states that you will need to study each active and the contribution it makes to safety and efficacy. There's nothing in here that's inherently anti-MPT. The challenge of the combination rule is that approval of a drug with more than one active, you can imagine, will require two complete well-controlled studies for each of the actives and then for the combination as well. So there's a more efficient pathway known as co-development where you study the combination only. There's a 2013 FDA guidance, co-development of 2 or more investigational drugs for use in combination. And this is interesting because it points out that co-development generally provides less information about safety and efficacy than if you had studied the drugs on their own. And for this reason, the guidance is that co-development is ordinarily limited to situations where it's a serious or life-threatening condition. There's a strong biological rationale. There's full non-clinical characterization is done, and there's a good reason the drugs can't be developed separately. So they kind of limit the use of co-development, and so this would seem to exclude most MPTs. The EMA also has a guidance limiting the use of fixed-dose combination medicinal products. There's a March 2017 guidance that says in part that part of the rationale for an MPT may be to optimize adherence, which I think is the rationale for a lot of MPTs. But it goes on to say that that is insufficient by itself to be a complete rationale for fixed combination medical products. So that's the regulation and the guidance. What we have heard from the FDA in our communications is that they do recognize the challenges with developing an agent which may have benefits for multiple infectious entities. And they said, in general, the development pathway for each of the indications will vary, and it will depend on the selected clinical endpoints. And very significantly, they said, you may be able to include multiple endpoints of relevance in a trial. So the FDA seems to be open to the so-called co-development, at least to some degree. And if we go to the next slide, there's another meaning of the word combination that's a challenge for MPT product developers, and that is the combination products. And the challenge of combination product designation is that it adds complexity to the regulatory pathway. There are more than 20 guidances touching on combination products, and now there's a new one. It's called Principles of Pre-Market Pathways for Combination Products from January 2022. A lot of what's in this guidance is not new. It's a combination product is still a product composed of 2 or more different types of medical products, including drugs, devices, and biologicals. So it doesn't necessarily apply to all MPTs, but it does to many. And this guidance describes pathways for device-led, drug-led, and biologics-led products, and provides examples of pathway analysis. And this is a helpful guidance to get us through that challenge of that complexity. If we go to the next slide, for MPTs, we're seeing a label. We're seeking a label that has more than one indication, 2 or more endpoints. This is a challenge in prioritizing which indications we're going to be able to prove clinical efficacy for. So for a contraceptive trial, we know that the FDA expects 20,000 cycles of exposure for a new chemical entity and 10,000 for a change to an already approved product. For prevention of seroconversion endpoint, you might find that the numbers don't match up, and as a result, the trial might be more expensive. And for MPTs, where we're combining products with some other product, we have existing labeling in a lot of situations, and that's an issue. Our advice from the FDA on the DPP label was that since we're co-formulating those two different products together into a fixed dose tablet, this would need to have its own label, and we would have to basically go back to the drawing board, to the physician's labeling rule, and make an entirely new label. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about device regulations. In the case of Annovera, where we became aware of some specific device requirements later in the development process, the project team needed to do a lot of work to respond to requests from CDRH related to our device constituent part. They requested the additional work on the risk analysis, design verification, an FMEA. They wanted additional biocompatibility information. We had biocompatibility information for each of the components of the drug constituent part, which are elastomers, but we didn't have it on the product itself, and they wanted to see that. Mechanical testing was something they asked for. This is things like tensile strength, how strong the ring is, and compression force, how much effort it takes to compress that ring. And they wanted those testings to be done not just on the product at the time of release, but they want us to store on stability and to test those mechanical properties. They wanted condom compatibility testing. There's an ASTM standard for condom compatibility with lubricants, and the FDA is willing to work with sponsors to adapt that test for use on your device. And finally, now the FDA is asking for additional evidence of the fate of any kind of an implant that might be a device constituent part. One last word about device regulations. If you're developing a combination product with a device constituent part, it's easy to do a study of just that device constituent part, if it's appropriate and if it's a low risk device study. You can do this with just IRB approval. You don't need to make a submission to FDA. And we use this pathway to study different ring sizes in the EEQ project. If we go to the last slide, I have already discussed one CMC issue for MPTs, and that is the addition of elements of the device regulations which require additional testing, like mechanical testing. On top of that is the increased complexity of analytical procedures, such as gas chromatography and high performance liquid chromatography, which are typically used as separation techniques for purity analysis. When you start adding more than one active ingredient, you're adding in the related substances and the degradation products, it quickly becomes very difficult to separate them out in a validated method. For the DPP product, we had a CMC challenge. While our goal eventually is in vivo bioequivalence, in order to guide the formulation development, we're using in vitro dissolution testing. And since the two different products have in vitro dissolution tests that are different, we have to run both of them on our new product and on the innovator's products to try to match them. And then hopefully the goal is to match the in vivo bioequivalence. So in my suggested readings, I included two guidances on meetings with FDA. They encourage sponsors to meet with them. Nowadays, most meetings are written responses only, but it's a good chance to describe your strategy and rationale for that strategy and ask if they concur. So I think that's the best advice, is to ask FDA carefully considered questions. And that's all I have, Susanna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Great presentation. If anyone has immediate questions for Daniel, we can take them in the chat, or again, you can unmute yourself and share with the group. I see new question here. How do you test for in vitro dissolution test in the USP apparatus?
So I'm not sure if it's the USP, as many of you know, the USP describes 2 or 3 different apparati for dissolution testing. One is a basket suspended in a 900 ml vessel, and you spin it around in an aqueous environment. Does that help answer your question?
Sorry, no, this is Robin Belsas from FFM. Those apparatus, the volume is so high, like you mentioned, is 900. So with the vaginal administration route, you would expect something that is more like 25 ml or even short of that. So I'm trying to understand, how do you do a dissolution, especially when you have a drug that is the target engagement that needs to get to the site? How do you examine the dissolution of that drug from the gel, release from the gel, and get to the site?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's 2 kind of competing things going on. When the USP, when you present a dissolution test to the FDA, one of the things they're going to look for is what's called sink conditions. So sink conditions means the bulk dissolution medium does not have a significant concentration of the actives in it, so that it's providing a pushback, a concentration gradient going back into the dosage form. They want to make sure that the dosage form is freely able to allow the actives to migrate out of the dosage form.
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you use too much volume, and then if you have a very potent drug substance, you run up against issues of being able to detect that amount. And we run into that with ethinyl estradiol, which is very potent and it's hard to detect.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm more concerned about the volume, like what apparatus you would use, like in, I don't know. And
What's your dosage form?
I know it's something that it's small, but you got to test the volume because you're not taking it orally, right? It's a vaginal space, so it's going to be very small. So there's no such apparatus out there that I know of. So that's all I was asking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I see one more question from Kavita Ananda in the chat. Could you explain what you mean by fate of implant?
I'm sorry, by site of implant? Oh, the fate of the implant. I'm sorry. So this has a long history, but anytime you have an implant that's intended for use more than 30 days, the FDA is going to be very interested in what goes in and what comes out. If what goes in and what comes out, the difference is only the active ingredient, that's the best situation, right? And that's what you want to design. But what can happen is if the implant is at all biodegradable, some of it might not come out. Some depot type implants, if you will, are designed so that nothing comes out. So the FDA is going to be very interested in knowing what happens to that material that you put in there. It didn't have a therapeutic effect on the body, so they want to know about what happens to that.
Thank you, Daniel.
Sure.
If there's any last questions, they can come in the chat right now. Otherwise, again, we'll have more time during the group discussion for any other questions for Daniel. All right, we can transition to our third panelist, Wilberto Robles. Wilberto, you can introduce yourself a little more and share your slides with the group.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Suzanne, for introducing me. So yeah, my name is Wilberto Robles. Let me open. Hold on a sec. You see my screen now?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Roberto Robles. I am Senior Director, Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance for WCG Cares. So I will be presenting, Dan and Mary explained really well the regulatory environment in developed countries, US FDA, EU, and so on and so forth. My presentation will be more focused on LMICs in terms of what the environment for MPTs in those settings. So why does registration matter for those that are not very familiar with the regulatory requirements, and how is why is registered a given product? So basically, through the process of registration, regulatory authorities review key information about the product, including clinical trial data, to determine if it should be allowed on the market. Once the registration is granted, the regulatory authorities continue to monitor the product throughout its life cycle in the market. So, the regulatory body comes into play, since the early development phases until the post-approval when the product is in the market. So who regulates? Essentially, national regulatory authorities like the US FDA are responsible for reviewing and granting or rejection of registration application. But outside of the US, these authorities are commonly a branch of the Ministry of Health. Sometimes they are, a separate entity, but sometimes are part of the branch of the Ministry of Health itself. There are stringent regulatory authorities such as the US FDA, EMA, Japan, Health Canada, and so on and so forth. And that is typically, those are authorities that provides expertise and resources for the proper evaluation of regulated products. And they are more, resourced to conduct in-depth evaluation of registration of a given product. So in terms of the classification and categories for regulatory applications, we have medical devices on one side, drug product or medicines on the other side, and you have combination products. And within that, you have other possible combinations. For example, you can have two active ingredients drug product, which will be considered a drug product, but you can have, that type of product in addition to a medical device. There are some examples there that for having a better idea. So in terms of registration dossier and what is required to present a product application to get marketing authorization approval in a given country, typically, the data is presented in a format called Common Technical Document, which is a format initially developed by the ICH. And this is the ICH triangle, which is, a very common diagram to show how the data should be presented in basically 5 modules, whereas the module 1 is administrative document, local requirements such as, GMV certificates, any letter of authorization, power of attorney, those kind of documents that CPP and those kind of documents that are express the administrative part of the dossier. Then you have module 2, which summarize the modules 3, 4, and 5, the quality sections, non-clinical and clinical sections, and modules 3, 4, and 5 for those sections accordingly. That's kind of the typical structure of a dossier for a drug product. There is also what they call a technical file or design dossier for medical devices in order to obtain, either a 510K or CE mark in the EU. And when you have a combination product, you need to deal with both of them, not just the one part or the other. So in terms of the registration pathways on country by country, different to the the US FDA or EMA or MHRA, that they do have extensive resources to go in depth and evaluate a given product. In LMICs, you have authorities with less resources to go in depth and make a proper evaluation of your product. Sometimes they do, because you can go straight in your first registration, let's say to PPV Kenya, and you might get an approval from them right away. But considering the limited resources in some of this national regulatory authorities, they rely a lot on other previous approvals, such as the US FDA or MHRA, or even the WHO pre-qualification process, which I will explain a little bit further. But essentially, they rely on other registrations in most of the cases in order to extend marketing authorization approval. So there are other ways to register your product in, if you're planning to register in multiple countries of the same region, you can consider the regional harmonization initiatives that are being in development. Some of them are, more advanced than others. For example, we recently had a really successful experience supporting the registration of Avivela LNG IUS through using the EAC Regional Harmonization Initiative in East Africa, and registering in Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, more or less in the same time. And even though they still don't have like the mutual recognition where you can register and it's like a one-stop shop for all of your registrations, you need to apply for each of the countries, but at least you have a centralized place where you can file your application and get, input from your dossier. And once that is finished, they issue what they call, a report that you bring to each of the countries in that particular region to seek approval in each of the countries, which is, a huge advantage if you are considering to tackle multiple countries in one region. So the other pathway to evaluate the WHO pathway, basically in many countries, shortages of human and technical and financial resources are weakened as low local regulatory systems prevent the people from accessing to this high quality, contraceptives or HIV prevention products. So manufacturers often lack of interest in pursuing those registration in the market because they can be time consuming, and costly as well. So basically, the role of the WHO is to support the access of essential medicines, to make it easier for manufacturers and NRAs to review the applications, the national regulatory authorities. And they set some norms and standards and develop guidelines too, so they can, you can have harmonized requirements in some way. For example, they do have a guidance to establish which stability conditions should be required according to the country or region. And that's something really important that developers or manufacturers should know early enough so they can develop stability data for your products before hitting the market, so you don't have a surprise at the end and not have the necessary stability data for submission. They also advise on issues related to quality assurance and assist in building national regulatory capacity, as well as the pre-qualification program, which is an evaluation of your product that is very well recognized across LMIC national regulatory bodies. So there's another thing that people, manufacturers and developers consider, which is the special import permits for those products that are still not approved, but would like to import products for research or any emergency situation. This is kind of a temporary solution to bring products to the country, but not necessarily, a permanent long-term solution. So which pathway to choose here? I developed a little diagram where you can have an idea of what to pursue, whether the product has SRA approval or not, has WHO pre-qualification or not, and how you can better consider different options for your products to bring it to the market. So basically, in terms of the product registration steps, I would recommend the following 9 steps. First of all, and early enough, conduct a desktop assessment to review the country-specific registration requirements, which are available online, and identify local stakeholders and potential marketing authorization holder candidates. This is in particular very, very relevant because as Dan mentioned earlier, there's right now there are more guidance and regulations around combination products, and MPTs might fall under those regulations. The problem is that in LMICs, they most of them doesn't have a combination product guidance itself. So what they are doing nowadays is that they consider your product typically in the most stringent classification. If, for example, it's a medical device and a drug product, they usually regulate under the drug product regulations, and they you should submit data for both the device and the drug product, but it is evaluated under the drug product regulatory area in the agency. And identifying local stakeholders is really, really important because no matter, there might be some written guidance in terms of how to register a given product, we have the experience that not always they follow the guidance. So, having local stakeholders will definitely help in terms of what to do and where to go and try to get your product quicker to the market. Perform an in-country regulatory landscape assessment if it is necessary. That's always very important because, as I said, not every time you have the written guidance implemented in that country. Assist the manufacturer or sponsor to select and appoint the local technical representative or marketing authorization holder. That's really important because some manufacturers or developer doesn't have the contacts in every country that they would like to pursue, and having a local contact is sometimes required, and sometimes and all the time important. Communicate with the manufacturer to obtain required documents for registration. And that's really important. And as I mentioned, something as simple as a stability requirement should be addressed early enough so you don't end up requiring 2 years data in a condition that you didn't thought and tested. Submit registration dossier on behalf of the manufacturer. Request import permit for any samples needed as part of the registration process. That's really important because if you don't have that import permit, your registration will be on hold for sure until you get the samples submitted to the agency. Once that import permit is received, obviously coordinate the shipment of the samples, communicate the receipt of the marketing authorization approval with internal and external partners, and prepare the request for post-registration updates. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, the registration, the regulatory activity does not end at the marketing authorization approval. You need to be responsible for the product even after the product is approved, either with the pharmacovigilance or post-approval variations that will be required for your product once it is on the market. So I just developed here some secrets for success after we had experience registering over 16 products in over 90 countries. And the first secret I would like to share is make sure you understand the regulatory landscape and identify the right registration pathway for your products. You have multiple ways to register, either through reference, SRA approval, WHO pre-qualification. In the EU, you have the article, what used to be the Article 58, and now it's EU and for all, or the Swissmedic MHDHP, which is another procedure in particular for East Africa. So make sure you identify those options you have in your hand because there might be some suitable for your product. Second secret I would like to share is identify a good local partner. This is really important because, as I said, there's not always what is written in the guidance it's enforced. So having somebody on the ground to touch base constantly with the authority is really important. Third secret I would like to share is meet with the local authorities and stakeholders. For example, I had the experience of registering a given product in Kenya in the past. So we met with the local nurse association, OBGYN association, which you even won't think that it will be relevant, but down the road, it might be relevant in situations where they can advocate for your product, considering that there might be a need of that product in the country. And for MPTs, for sure, it will be a really good attention to that product. The fourth secret is establish a good post-approval registration management. As I said, it's not just to register the product and forgive. You need to support your product throughout the life cycle and report any adverse events or any keep signal detection to see if there is something happening with your product while it's on the market, as well as if you want to extend your shelf life, you need to submit a variation, those kind of things that are really relevant to your to the commercialization of your product. And at the end, keep calm and don't panic. It's the potential changes and ongoing delays to many factors, such as regulation changes, lack of support from the local partner, delays in the review from the agency, etc. That could happen. So establish a follow-up plan and make sure you stick to it. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Wilberto, for that presentation. Some additional perspectives in addition to what we heard from Mary and Daniel. With that, we will segue into our Q&A or kind of facilitated discussion for today, and we'll let questions for Wilberto come in during this time. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat or unmute yourself or raise your real or virtual hand to talk. And we did receive several questions from participants ahead of the webinar. So I'll invite Bethany now to help facilitate this section of today's discussion. Bethany, would you like to kick off some questions that have come in so far?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. First off, I'd like to echo Susanna in thanking Mary, Dan, and Wilberto for your excellent presentations that were so thoughtful and generous, and very, very generous of you to share your time and your expertise. So we'd like to start with several questions that were submitted by webinar registrants sort of ahead of time. And then if you all have additional questions, there is I'm sure by now everyone knows, you can raise your virtual hand through Zoom, or just put the questions in chat. So, this is a question for Dan, Mary, and Roberto. What support, resources, or outstanding information about the regulatory pathway for MPTs do you think would help advance the pipeline, the MPT pipeline the most? Dan?
So I think it's something that Mary touched on in her presentation, and that is the degree to which we can include more than one indication, meaning for different unrelated endpoints in one clinical study. And what we're hearing is that the FDA is open to that. You know, the only thing that I would add is maybe a guidance that's specifically for MPTs that addresses this issue.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, that point, because I know that there were, you know, guidances have been developed for microbicides. So am I hearing you say that perhaps guidances specifically for MPTs would be useful?
Yeah, and I think the guidance that you're referring to is the one for antiretrovirals. Is that?
I think
Is that
so.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's very specifically designed around products that are addressing just one indication. And so something along the lines of an MPT guidance would be useful.
In addition to that, I would say, you know, implementation or recognition of combination products in LMICs would be very beneficial because, you know, as I said, there are some of them or most of them that they don't have any particular guidance. They just have medical device or drug products, and they don't have anything in combination of both of them. So that would be definitely helpful in LMICs.
Great, thank you. As we wait for other questions to come in, here's another question. How do the regulatory pathways outlined for female-initiated MPTs apply to male formulations? So for example, an MPT gel with an anti-infective properties that could be delivered rectally. You know, that's a new, you know, this is, it's sort of, yeah, so we'd be interested to hear if any of you have thought about that.
This is Mary. I mean, obviously, we designed our gel for vaginal application. In our case, I think we really have to be concerned that the gel itself, if it were intended for, if the intended route of administration was receptive rectal intercourse, then we would probably have to really evaluate the safety of it there. I know that there's issues around osmolality that are very different between vaginal application and rectal. So you know, I think from a company standpoint, you'd want to make sure you had something that was safe. So that would be the first thing that you would have to consider from a regulatory standpoint. And you know, you may have to alter the formulation. So
Great, thank you, Mary. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Okay. There's a question in here from Chris Cavendish to Wilberto. Chris, would you like, you're welcome to get off mute if you'd like to pose your question directly.
Sure, not a problem at all. And hi, everybody. Wilberto, you probably saw this one coming, but looking at the regional registration hubs, I think for me, I'm quite keen to acknowledge the fact that there is a multiple levels of maturity with each of these regional hubs, as we refer to them here. But I'm keen to know from yourself, do you, or are you aware, or do you perceive any kind of clear paths to these regional hubs having more potential to handle harmonization across the board, whether that's combinations of drugs or whether that's looking across the board at medical devices, etc., of having harmonization that's allowed to be done after registration in one country? Probably a case in point, we could say Kenya, Tanzania, and the likes of Uganda, for example. Any insight on that, Wilberto, that you may have?
Yeah. Basically, In terms of maturity, they're running in a very different pace. I would say, you know, the more advanced ones, I would say will be EAC and Zazibona, the one in Southern Africa. In terms of the regional harmonization initiatives, the problem I see is that there is no indication, as far as I know, that they're moving to incorporate combination product in their, you know, in their maturity as evaluating products. So having that, you know, sorted out, it's still very early for them to adopt that. So they are in the process of establishing and implementing that. And I have been monitoring the development of AMA, the African Medicines Authority, which is, you know, is progressing, but not yet implemented in force. And maybe with that, you know, at least in Africa, you can have a more robust systems to tackle this. Other regions, you know, outside Africa, like the CARICOM in the Caribbean or the ASEAN in Southeast Asia, they basically develop standardized guidelines and not having like a very structured cross-country evaluation.
Understood. Thank you very much, Roberto.
Anytime, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you. I also see a question from Robin Belsas. Robin, would you like to get off mute and pose your question?
Sure, thank you. There's not a guidance out there that I know of for vaginal or rectal administration to set limits for impurities such as EI, residual solvents, or whatever else, mostly oral or parenteral. How do you set a limit value for vaginal administration? I've seen where people call it like a topical and they use the 10x approach, the oral limit. Is that the right approach or the best approach? And this alluded back to what you guys were saying, we need more guidances for vaginal and rectal administration.
So I will try to answer that. I think it's safe to use the guidance that's available for oral products if you're developing a topical product. You know, certainly you could think of that as being, you know, a conservative approach. But in the absence of a specific guidance, that's about all that we have. So that's what we would use.
Okay. Well, then if you use the oral, that means it's a pretty tight conservative approach. When, you know, that makes it a very low limit for each of the impurities, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on the impurity you're talking about. I know when the drug we're working with was first developed, it was using an organic solvent to create the salt, if I remember right. It's been a while. And the drug loved hanging on to that solvent. And even though we knew once we had a gel, it would be highly diluted, but we made the decision to change the method for making the salt and reuse water. So we just got rid of that problem that way. And our elemental analysis is very clean. We're very fortunate. So taking, you know, using simple excipients, trying to avoid solvents that that could be, you know, look like a safety concern. You know, I guess I would have expected if we just absolutely had to have that as part of our bioassay and analysis, we would have been looking to see if it was being systemically absorbed. And also you'd be concerned that if you're seeing, you know, is this one of the contributors to an irritation problem for us, you know, for the application we're looking at. So anyway, I think we made the right decision doing that work.
Right. Thank you, Mary. But in the case where you can't get away with it, you have to use that solvent, then you actually should be setting a values, and oral is not going to work. You're going to have to justify why you have to go, you know, 5x or 10x, right?
That may be one of those that may be one of those conversations you just have to have with FDA.
Right.
Since they don't have a guidance document.
Right. So it alluded to, we need more guidances regarding vaginal or rectal administrations for MPT. Yeah, thank you.
That is, oh, go ahead.
If you guys, if we're staying on the same subject, I was going to switch subject and ask Roberto a question. That's all.
Oh, go ahead, and then I can go to the next question in the feed. Go ahead, Robin.
All right. So Roberto, this is a question for the CE mark. Is the CE mark only, does it only apply to finished drug product or devices? Basically, if you were in the process of selecting a device, would you look for devices that have a CE marking already?
Yeah, CE mark is a huge help. Even though the review to keep a CE mark is very minimal or non-existent. So, but having it historically, based on my experience registering a medical device, it's a key. You know, if you don't have CE mark, ISO 13485 certificate, it will be very so. But getting CE mark for a device is extremely easy to get. Well, depending on the device, but it's a very simple process, so it shouldn't be an issue.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
Great. Thank you very much. Those were great questions. So it sort of ties in with a question from Navita Jan. What role do you think, or do you see advocates playing in engaging with the FDA or other regulators around MPTs? And I think this is to all the presenters, but Navita, if you have anything to add, please unmute yourself and you can do so.
Nothing really to add. I think, thanks, Bethany, you did a great job of articulating the question. Just to say that I see a lot of conversations happening more and more around regulatory bodies as it related to COVID and in HIV prevention research. And I feel like this is a really interesting area that I think advocates could really get involved in, and particularly as we're talking about this guidance document, and just wanted to hear from you all on how you think that advocates or civil society members could be engaged in those conversations.
Yeah, I have one really, you know, and I don't know if this will be possible, but as you all know, you know, having a product listed on the WHO model of essential medicines is really important in order to speed up the registration process down the road. So, and I don't know if this will be possible or not, but maybe suggesting WHO to create a new classification or category for MPTs as part of the WHO model list for essential medicines. I think that might be something to keep in mind if possible with the WHO.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I'm trying to see if anyone from WHO isn't on with us today who could join in. I know they've been very engaged with the IMPT in the past, so that's a great suggestion. Okay. Anything else? Thank you for asking that question, Navita. Travis, I see your hand. Travis Kent from NICHD.
Yes, hi. Let me get some decent lighting. My name is Travis Kent. I'm a program officer at NICHD. And so I wanted to ask a question from the perspective of a potential product developer. Let's say I'm developing a brand new product and I'm at University of Washington. And I don't really have any experience with interacting with regulatory agencies. I'm relatively new to the product development field. Let's say I'm a reproductive biologist by trade. A couple of questions that I have, like, at what point in the product development process should I begin to think about engaging with regulatory agencies? What should I be bringing to the table in those conversations as far as what experiments should I have thought about doing or have done? Let's say I'm working in the mouse, is that going to be sufficient, or should I be thinking about rabbits or non-human primates? And then finally, when I'm in those discussions with regulatory agencies, what questions should I be thinking about asking them that is going to help me move my product forward?
I'll take a stab at that first, because that was really kind of where we were at in the beginning. There's a real formal process for talking with the FDA, especially if you're just, a little organization. And it was really very helpful that we had gotten professional toxicologists that had been at big pharma. They're now consultants. And I would say they were very helpful in helping us craft our questions specifically around the preclinical studies. And then you really need, I think, for us at least, if you want this to be effective and efficient, having a regulatory consulting company that can help you craft the whole package that you need to submit in order to even ask questions. They say it's so funny because FDA, oh, call us, we'll talk to you. And the impression I get from everybody that really does that says they never talk to you. You need to go through a very formal scripted process, asking for a meeting, and they'll grant it. And then you have to submit a data package, which is very complete in a timely fashion, or they won't schedule the whole thing. So it's that whole formal process is there. So I think that in our case, we got a hold of, in fact, when we really finally had funding, we actually had somebody who was at, doggone it, Dr. Bill Rencher, who had a bunch of experience working with Conrad, so finding those kind of people that were willing to talk to us and to help us sort of get started, because we had so many unknowns at that time. So you just got to find people with experience in this field and never stop asking those questions. And then it was balanced by people like the tox guys that we used had no experience in this field. So they had a lot to learn too. But what they brought was all the current stuff going on around bioassay, bioanalytical, analytical method development, everything else, very current. So you just got to start collecting people. And sometimes, they aren't the right person at the end of the day, but that was the way that we finally were able to get a package together and get some answers from the FDA. And also the other thing is there's a lot of people that have done a lot of work at this point in time, a lot of published information on studies. And I can't encourage people enough, read what they did. Doesn't mean it's necessarily everything that you would do, but read the publications. There's tons of information out there from prior products that have tried to go through this process. Clinicaltrials.gov, we get a lot of information from how clinical trials have been conducted. So I'm sorry, it's not a clean, there's not a one point of contact here, but you just got to brace yourself. You're going into business now. So you're going to have to start getting out of the university setting and really thinking like, we're going to have to get some progress here, hit some milestones, and here's the people I need to make it happen, and start to find those people. That's my advice.
Great, thank you, Mary. Travis, anything else to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'm just curious if Daniel has anything more to add.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Mary said. But I would encourage you to just read that guideline on formal meetings with FDA, and it is a formal process, but it's a very simple formal process. They'll give you the form, you fill out the form, you mail it in, and they'll give you a meeting time. So, but you asked about what kind of information that you would need to give them to get a meeting, and I would say that you have to know what your active ingredient is. You might have some animal data that shows efficacy in a model. You might have an idea of some dosage forms. You don't have to be, I don't think, positive on the dosage form. You could have 2 that you propose, but you want to tell them something about how you're going to deliver it. And then ideally you would have at least a protocol synopsis, because the most significant thing they're going to give you is a study may proceed letter, which comes after you give them your IND, which is going to be a year or 2 from now probably. But at this point, at the pre-IND meeting, you can give them really just the bare bones outline, study synopsis, and some of the chemistry, manufacturing type information, and you can get a meeting with just that information.
That's absolutely correct. Sorry, I really admitted that. I mean, it's all about your studies for animal, the animals that are going to allow you to do studies in human, and then your chemistry. And so it all goes to what's that first study going to be, and what's the indication, and then you have to ask good questions that they can either concur, or they can say no, or they can offer suggestions to.
That's so right, Mary. So the FDA is not going to tell you how to do anything, but they'll say yes or no when you, because they consider you the expert, which you are, and then you have to tell them, I think this is reasonable and scientifically valid, and then they'll say yes or no. But what Mary said is exactly right.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. I see one more question, and then we're getting to the top of the hour and a half. So, so the last question I see in here is from Deborah Anderson. Were any penotoxicity tests required for vaginal MPT clinical trials in your experiences?
We did a male, we had a rabbit study that included, of course, it was vaginal irritation, but it had males, and we did penile irritation. And of course, did, bioanalysis of both genders. And then it's intended in our phase 1 clinical trial that we will have males enrolled, and exactly that, look for irritation, and do bioanalysis of any kind of systemically absorbed drug. So that's our plan. Nobody asked for it. We just thought that we needed to do that. So.
And for our vaginal ring, I don't think we needed to do any specific studies on penile irritation, but the ring was not felt by the male partner in almost all cases. And so by the time that we would have been asked for it, we already had phase 3 data, which would have uncovered that issue if it had been an issue.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for your questions and responses. I'm going to hand it back over to Susanna.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Bethany, for leading that discussion with our panelists and those sharing questions on the line. Just to wrap up today, I wanted to share a few closing announcements. As I mentioned at the beginning, in case some people weren't on the line, at our MPT Resource Center at the impt.org, we have a learning events page where we post the recordings, reading slides from our webinar series, and announce upcoming topics. There are a lot of other MPT relevant resources there that you're free to browse as well. And we are planning several more webinars in the series over the coming months. So we invite you to stay tuned. If you're on our MPT Insider newsletter already, then you'll also get those in your inbox, and you can sign up for that on our website as well. And we're on social media too, if you want to follow us there. And that is about it. So thanks again to everyone who joined us today, and we look forward to seeing many of you in future events. And a special thanks to our speakers today who shared a lot of their lessons learned and tips for success. We appreciate everyone's time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.